The American Heartland just got stabbed in the back, and nobody even showed up to explain why. That's what happened when Case YH, the legendary farm equipment giant, announced it was ending all U.S. manufacturing. No warning, no transition, just a cold, calculated move from a boardroom in London that blindsided thousands of workers in towns like Racine and Fargo. Within hours, layoffs swept through communities. Tractors stopped rolling. Diners, dealerships, and tool shops fell silent. Generations of loyalty vanished with a single live stream. This wasn't business as usual, it was betrayal, and the fallout has only just begun. So why did Case IH abandon the country that built it? Who made the call? And can anyone stop the collapse of a $34.5 billion industry? Red tractors, broken promises. For many rural Americans, Case YH wasn't a brand. It was a bond, the kind of bond you pass down like a family farm. Kids in small towns wore red caps, not because they were trendy, but because their parents worked at the plant. Fathers taught sons how to change oil on the tractor, the same way they were taught. Marriages, birthdays, and retirement parties were scheduled around harvest season, and Case YH was always in the center. So when the shutdown came, it didn't just tear through employment numbers. It ripped through the social fabric of dozens of towns that had been built around that roaring red logo. There were no transition packages, no buyouts, no community briefings, just cold emails and pink slips. It was as if a tornado had swept through the Midwest, but this time, the damage was delivered in corporate lingo. In places like Goodfield, Illinois, and Grand Island, Nebraska, the company wasn't just another tractor on the lot, it was the tractor. For farmers, owning one was a badge of honor. For mechanics, fixing one meant steady income. And for salesmen, selling one meant supporting the entire town. Now those same farmers feel duped. They'd stood by these tractors through economic downturns, through rising steel costs, through lean harvests and trade wars. And now, just when things were beginning to stabilize, they were told the company had outgrown them. And it didn't stop with the factories. The dealerships, many of them family-owned, were left in limbo. Inventory had to be written down. Marketing contracts were canceled. Sponsorships for school sports vanished. Some dealerships attempted to pivot to Kubota or AGCO. Others simply locked their doors. The betrayal didn't end with the economic fallout. It was emotional, psychological, generational. Farmers reported feeling orphaned by the brand they trusted. Mechanics spoke of being used. One local mayor described the closure as a knife in the back of every working-class family. And when the factories went dark, Main Street followed, from Titan to Turncoat. Case IH once stood as a symbol of American strength, born from the merger of Case Corporation and International Harvester, both rooted in the soil of America's heartland. Their machines powered revolutions in agriculture, feeding the world and fueling prosperity at home. The brand's logo wasn't just stamped on equipment, it was etched into barns, baseball diamonds, and belt buckles. Through the Great Depression, through 2 world wars, through the farm crises of the 80s, it stood tall. When the American farmer needed a reliable partner, the red tractor was there. But somewhere along the way, the mission shifted. The boardroom began using words like global leverage and market velocity. Leaders praised supply chains that stretched across oceans. Investors salivated over labor cost savings, but what they forgot, what they fundamentally misunderstood, was that the company wasn't built in spreadsheets. It was built in soil. The decision to abandon U.S. manufacturing didn't just impact production numbers. It rewrote the legacy of the entire brand, from Made in America to Design for Shareholders, from generational loyalty to quarterly earnings, from icon to antagonist. In industry expos, competitors whispered with a mix of disbelief and delight. AGCO called the move a mistake. John Deere doubled down on America First advertising. But the real cost wouldn't show up on a ballot. It would show up on the balance sheet. Ghost towns and factory gates in Racine, Wisconsin, and Fargo, North Dakota. The silence that followed the company shutdown announcement was deafening. Red tractors rolled down main streets during 4th of July parades. Local hardware stores stocked parts because they knew who their customers were. And every morning, thousands of families woke up to the rhythmic pulse of machinery from nearby Case IH plants. But when the factories stopped, the heartbeat of these towns skipped and then flatlined. It began with the pink slips. Within 24 hours of the announcement, thousands of workers were laid off. Cafes that opened at dawn to serve workers on early shifts saw empty booths and full coffee pots. Tool suppliers received cancellation notices. Local schools braced for enrollment drops as families prepared to move in search of new jobs. In a matter of days, the entire local economy began to unravel. We put in the work, tracing the shutdowns, decoding the strategy, and connecting the dots behind closed doors. If that's worth your time, it's worth a like and a subscribe. Pensions were thrown into uncertainty. Apprenticeships were canceled mid-program. Small businesses that relied on the company traffic began closing their doors permanently. And while company spokespeople pointed to strategic global realignment, those words felt meaningless to the diner owner who had to lay off his last remaining cook. What was once a vibrant partnership between industry and community now felt like abandonment. But this was only the first blow, because what followed wasn't just economic decay. It was the collapse of something deeper, trust. And when the workers looked for answers, what they found instead was a locked hood and a service-required message they couldn't clear on their own. Locked out and shut down. For generations, farmers took pride in their independence. They weren't just operators. They were mechanics, technicians, and engineers in their own right. A tractor was more than a machine. It was a toolkit on wheels. But it changed that. Modern case. IH machines are marvels of engineering. Loaded with GPS systems, precision planting algorithms, and automated diagnostics. But all of that advancement came with a price. Proprietary software, encrypted systems, locked repair ports. For even the most experienced farmers, fixing a malfunctioning combine became an exercise in frustration. If a sensor failed during harvest, farmers couldn't patch it themselves. If a calibration slipped during planting season, they had to call a certified technician, often waiting days, sometimes weeks for help. Those delays didn't just cost time, they cost yields, they cost money, and most painfully, they cost farmers the sense of control they had always relied on. That's why the right to repair movement exploded. What began as online forums and angry Facebook posts quickly turned into coordinated protests, state-level lobbying, and national pressure campaigns. Farmers argued that if they couldn't fix their own equipment, they didn't own it. And when those machines were also being built overseas, trust in the brand collapsed even faster. Several states began introducing legislation demanding that manufacturers share diagnostic tools and software access. The Federal Trade Commission launched preliminary inquiries. Meanwhile, Case YH stayed quiet, issuing only vague statements about safety protocols and protecting intellectual property. But in the court of public opinion, it was losing. And while the farmers fought for the right to repair, a much more costly failure was brewing behind the scenes. And what the spreadsheets didn't show, until it was too late, was that Case IH's globalization plan was bleeding money from every corner. The cost of going global. In theory, shutting down U.S. operations and shifting production to Brazil. For many small towns, Case YH was not just an employer, it was the heartbeat of the community. Generations of fathers, sons, and grandsons had worked the same plant line, and that shared experience created a cultural bond that cannot be replicated by global supply chains. Grew worse due to port backlogs and customs holdups. Quality control became inconsistent across regions. And worse still, parts shortages stalled production lines across multiple continents. Farmers who ordered new equipment were told it would arrive in 6 months, then 9, then maybe next year. And when the machines did arrive, many came with compatibility issues that required even more delays. The cost of logistics soared. Case IH had trimmed its domestic labor budget, but spent millions more moving incomplete inventory around the globe. The gamble to reduce overhead by outsourcing ended up inflating operating expenses. Meanwhile, the brand's customer service centers were overwhelmed with complaints and refund requests. Suppliers, too, felt the burn. With U.S. factories offline, long-standing contracts with domestic parts makers were terminated. That not only eliminated more jobs, it triggered legal battles and reputational damage. Shareholders started asking questions. Industry analysts issued warnings. The company's quarterly earnings slumped. And while executives insisted it was a transitional dip, many inside the company could see the real trend line: down. And then came the one shift no one could have predicted, not from the boardroom, but from the barn. Because when farmers saw the bill and the back order, they made a choice that the company never saw coming. The Farmer Rebellion. It started quietly. A few farmers traded in their red tractors for orange ones. A few more replaced their Case IH harvesters with AGCO models. And then it snowballed. For farmers who had once sworn allegiance to it, this wasn't just a financial decision, it was personal. Farmers weren't just walking away, they were revolting. And their message was clear: if you leave us, we leave you. The most damaging part: the rebellion was generational. Older farmers passed down their distrust to sons and daughters who were just entering the business. What had once been a symbol of legacy now felt like a cautionary tale. They tried to respond. Rebates, extended warranties, promotional campaigns. But it was too late. Farmers weren't looking for deals. They were looking for loyalty, and they weren't finding it in red anymore. But the company still had one card left to play, one gamble that could rewrite the rules or burn the entire field to the ground. Because while farmers defected in droves, Case IH doubled down on a future no one else was ready for. A new world, a new tractor. Case IH isn't building for Iowa anymore. It's building for India and Brazil. When the CEO took the podium and confirmed the shift, it wasn't just a manufacturing update. It was a manifesto. No hedging, no slow rollout, no hidden footnote. He made it brutally clear. Case IH would no longer be an American company in spirit or operation. Its future would be forged in the fields of Brazil, the rural districts of India, and the vast emerging economies of Africa. The decision wasn't just about costs. It was about control, expansion, and long-term dominance. But the price? That would be paid in silence by the farmers who made the brand a household name. In a leaked internal briefing to shareholders, executives laid out their new roadmap in stunning detail. They highlighted growth density, labor elasticity, and agility zones. Corporate speak for places where wages are low, regulations are few, and demand is booming. Brazil, for example, is expected to surpass the United States in mechanized agriculture output by the year 2030. India's farming sector employs over 200 million people, many of whom are transitioning to smart machinery for the first time. Sub-Saharan Africa, a sleeping giant, where population surges and food insecurity make farming the backbone of survival. That's where the company is planting its flag. New production hubs are opening in Pune and Chennai. In Brazil, factories in Sorocaba and Curitiba have doubled output since the announcement. Local governments offered tax incentives, land grants, and promises of minimal interference. The strategy is textbook globalization, lower labor costs, fewer union hurdles, and a fresh consumer base that hasn't yet been disillusioned. Inside American boardrooms, the move was seen as bold and forward-thinking. Investors applauded the pivot to scale. Economists called it inevitable evolution. But on the streets of Fargo, Des Moines, and Decatur, it felt like abandonment. Inside American boardrooms, the move was seen as bold and forward-thinking. Investors applauded the pivot to scale. Economists called it inevitable evolution. But on the streets of Fargo, Des Moines, and Decatur, it felt like abandonment. What makes this shift especially painful is that Case IH isn't just chasing the future, it's rewriting it. The machines being produced in Brazil and India aren't carbon copies of the old American models. They're built for different conditions, different crops, different terrains, more modular, more compact, and, most painfully, more advanced. Some of these new designs haven't even been offered to American customers. Farmers who were once first in line now find themselves locked out of innovation pipelines. "We built the legacy," one Iowa grower said, "and now we can't even get the software update." That's not just insulting, it's strategic. Case IH's leadership believes American demand is aging, stagnant, and unprofitable. So instead, they're targeting the Gen Z farmer in Sao Paulo, the startup-backed co-op in Nairobi, the autonomous megafarm in Gujarat. They're betting on a future where brand loyalty doesn't matter, but software dominance does. But while it looked overseas, another superpower had already beaten them to the punch. And as Case IH placed its bets in Brazil and India, China quietly seized the jackpot. China's farming machine. As America's fields rusted, China's fields roared. China didn't wait for Western brands to fall behind. While the United States was battling inflation and Europe was reeling from energy shocks, Beijing was building something massive. In less than a decade, China transformed itself into the largest agricultural machinery market in the world. And at the center of that transformation, a quiet, calculated partnership. with Case IH. You won't find it in press releases, but the numbers don't lie. Case IH's two most productive factories are no longer in Wisconsin or Illinois. They're in Tianjin and Harbin. These facilities don't just produce standard models. They produce next-generation equipment never sold in the United States. Lightweight harvesters for rice paddies, smart irrigation tractors designed for drought-prone regions, even autonomous sprayers capable of AI-driven path planning. And they're going to one market, China. Chinese officials, eager to escape reliance on foreign grain, have poured billions into mechanization. They gave the company access to massive infrastructure zones, waived export restrictions, and pushed regional banks to finance equipment purchases. The result? Case IH has become a major player in China's food sovereignty strategy. In return, China secured something even more valuable: leverage. When American farmers found out that new Case IH models were being paraded across Beijing expos, while their own dealerships received outdated inventory, the outrage was immediate. Forums lit up. Ag expos turned cold. One Michigan dealer put it bluntly, "We're second-class customers now." This wasn't just about supply chains, it was about symbolism. Case IH, the once proud icon of rural America, was now prioritizing Chinese markets. The optics were catastrophic. A brand that once stood for American independence was now helping fuel a foreign power's agricultural dominance. But Beijing didn't care about optics. It cared about efficiency. And while American fields sat empty and plants shut down, Chinese farms hummed with red machinery. Then, just as the backlash reached a boiling point, Donald Trump stepped in. And that's when Trump drew the line in the dirt. Tariff Tsunami. Trump's revenge came with a 200% price tag. President Donald Trump, never one to miss a populist flashpoint, declared economic war on Case IH. At a fiery rally in Des Moines, he thundered from the stage, "You don't get to kill American jobs and sell us tractors made in Brazil. Not on my watch." Then came the policy, a proposed 200% tariff on any Case IH equipment manufactured outside the United States. The crowd roared. Wall Street trembled. Within 48 hours, its parent company, CNH Industrial, lost nearly 5% in share value. Major banks issued downgraded forecasts. Hedge funds began shorting CNH stock. And behind closed doors, executives panicked. They had bet everything on globalization. And now the tide had turned. Trump's move wasn't just political, it was personal. He proposed redirecting billions in federal subsidies away from brands that outsource production. He floated the idea of banning foreign-built equipment from government fleet purchases. And he hinted that other farming giants, like John Deere, would be rewarded for staying local. Suddenly, Made in America wasn't just a slogan, it was a survival strategy. But Case IH couldn't pivot. It had already shuttered plants, laid off workers, and broken vendor contracts. It couldn't simply restart domestic operations overnight. The infrastructure was gone, the political goodwill was gone, and the investor confidence, that was next. And just when things couldn't get worse, Wall Street turned its back. The Markets Revolt. You can betray voters, but don't betray investors. When CNH Industrial's quarterly earnings missed expectations by double digits, investors didn't just flinch, they fled. Pension funds began pulling out. Retirement portfolios rebalanced away from agricultural stocks. Even high-frequency trading algorithms triggered cascading sell-offs. The market wasn't just reacting to tariffs or backlash, it was reacting to instability. Case IH had lost its American customer base, burned its domestic supply chain, and bet on emerging markets that were still volatile. Worse, it had done so while ignoring political reality. Wall Street doesn't forgive strategic blindness. Within 2 weeks, CNH's market capitalization dropped by nearly $12 billion. Analysts on earnings calls began asking hard questions. How do you recover loyalty? How do you mitigate backlash? How do you compete with Deere, AGCO, or even Kubota when your core market thinks you've betrayed them? And for the first time, Case IH didn't have an answer. In a rare investor letter, the CEO acknowledged reputational headwinds and transitional turbulence. But the damage was done. Board members began discussing leadership changes. Activist shareholders circled. The brand's long-term viability was suddenly in question. Yet even as the company unraveled, the industry was watching closely. And in the middle of it all, the industry watched in silence. Or did it? When titans fall, who fills the void? The collapse of Case IH's U.S. manufacturing wasn't just an isolated decision. It was a tremor that shook the entire agricultural industry. With a vacuum left in its wake, attention turned immediately to the other giants in the room: John Deere, AGCO, Kubota. Each had a choice to make. Would they capitalize on Case IH's downfall by doubling down on their American roots, or would they follow the same global roadmap in pursuit of short-term gains? At first, John Deere saw the writing on the wall and wasted no time launching a national campaign emphasizing its commitment to Made in America. Billboards went up in Iowa, Ohio, and Texas. TV ads featured generational farmers standing proudly beside their green tractors, delivering a clear message. We're staying. We're building. We're not going anywhere. AGCO took a more reserved route. Executives quietly commissioned internal studies to explore potential cost savings through offshoring, evaluating regions like Mexico and Southeast Asia for potential production hubs. Their analysts projected savings in the hundreds of millions over a decade. The boardroom was divided. Some saw an opportunity to jump ahead of the curve. Others saw a warning. Farmers were watching. Meanwhile, startup agri-tech firms smelled blood in the water. Smaller, more nimble companies started rolling out modular, farmer-friendly equipment, designed specifically to counteract Case IH's most hated moves, like software lockouts and international shipping delays. Some of these companies were US-based. Others were foreign startups eager to fill the gap. So while the company was bleeding market share, its rivals were weighing the cost of loyalty. Was heritage worth more than margin? Could sticking with American labor be spun into a competitive advantage? The industry was split, but one company made a bold, risky bet that could change everything. And it wasn't who anyone expected. But as the Titans recalibrated, Case IH was quietly building a new foundation. Not for old farmers, but for a whole new generation, betting on Gen Z. Case IH isn't just gambling on global growth, it's betting on the next generation of farmers. Beneath the media storm and small-town protests, Case IH's boardroom saw an opportunity most overlooked. While rural America mourned, the brand was already shifting its sights toward a new demographic, Gen Z. Born after the year 2000, this generation of future farmers is digital native, sustainability-focused, and less bound by legacy loyalties. They are less likely to follow in their parents' footsteps blindly and more inclined to embrace automation, artificial intelligence, and data-driven agriculture. The company saw this not as a threat, but as a chance to rewrite the rules. The company poured billions into R&D for autonomous planters, driverless tractors, and AI-powered irrigation systems. Their cloud-based FarmSight 360 platform promised full field visibility from a smartphone, crop yields, soil pH, and machine diagnostics, all in real time. Dealers began rebranding their showrooms into tech centers instead of machine shops. It was farming reimagined through a Silicon Valley lens. And for Gen Z, it worked. Early adopters embraced the sleek, simplified UI. TikTok influencers demoed precision farming tools like they were unboxing smartphones. Case IH began to appear not just in rural co-ops, but on college campuses and in ag-tech startup incubators. In terms of branding, it was a complete pivot, but the gamble came with a price. Older generations felt increasingly alienated. Farmers in their 50s and 60s, who once trusted Case IH with everything, now saw the brand as unrecognizable. Their tractors were no longer fixable in the barn. The red paint was still there, but the soul, they said, was gone, and the tech had limits. Internet-dependent machinery failed in areas without broadband. Repairs required advanced diagnostics. A downed AI planter during harvest wasn't just inconvenient, it was devastating. So yes, Case IH had found a new audience, but it had also lost its foundation. And no amount of artificial intelligence could restore what came next. Yet amid the backlash, a bigger, darker question was starting to take shape, a question that stretched beyond logos and tractor parts. Because once you remove the face of a company, you start to ask a deeper question. Who's really behind the wheel? Who really runs the farm? This was never just about Case IH. It was about who controls the future of food. As the dust settled, it became clear that it wasn't just another company chasing profit margins. It was the latest chapter in a much bigger story, one about power, food, and the people who control both. Behind the headlines about automation and outsourcing sat a deeper truth. When a multinational brand controls the means of production, the end product, in this case food security, is no longer in the hands of the community. It's in the hands of shareholders, foreign investors, and global logistics networks. The shift toward automation and global manufacturing isn't just a supply chain issue, it's a sovereignty issue. Farmers who once fixed their own combines are now locked into subscription models and digital diagnostics. The food that once started on American soil is now dependent on ports, silicon chips, and AI code. And when one piece breaks, the entire system cracks. Meanwhile, the political class is scrambling. Lawsuits, tariffs, and legislative hearings come and go, but the long-term trajectory remains unchanged. The question isn't whether the farmer is still at the center of agriculture, it's whether the farmer is even in the room anymore. Some call it progress, others call it collapse, but everyone agrees on one thing: the future of farming no longer looks like the past. And as it burns its bridges and builds its new empire, the rest of the world is left asking a final, chilling question. Because this isn't just about where tractors are built, it's about who gets to build the future. So now you know what Case IH won't say out loud: the layoffs, the betrayals, the global power shift hiding behind sleek presentations and tech demos. If this video gave you a clearer view of what's really at stake, drop a comment below.